It was Halloween morning in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, while children prepared for costumes and candy. By noon, a young mother would vanish, and a small community would be thrust into a nightmare. The last person to see her alive wasn't a stranger in the dark. It was the man her family trusted most. Before the night was over, faith would turn to fear, and a town would learn that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. They stand behind pulpits. Rebekah Jane Gay was 24 years old. She was the kind of woman people described as light in human form, sweet, soft-spoken, and endlessly kind. She worked at a local Goodwill store and lived a modest life with her 3-year-old son, Conway. Rebekah had dreams, but her world revolved around her boy. She was a single mother, balancing long shifts and quiet evenings in their little trailer decorated with Halloween pumpkins. Her mother, Sally, lived nearby and had recently gotten engaged to a man named John Douglas White, a 55-year-old pastor at a small Mount Pleasant church. John was respected, polite, and deeply involved in the community. He often helped with Rebekah's son, picking him up, watching him when she worked late. He was more than her mother's fiancé. He was family. He carried himself with the calm certainty of a man of God, always ready with a prayer or a kind word. But under that calm exterior, something dark had been waiting. October 31st, 2012. It was supposed to be a day filled with candy and costumes. But by morning, the unease had already begun. At 8 a.m., Rebekah's co-workers noticed she hadn't shown up for her shift. She was never late, not once. They called her phone. No answer. They texted. Nothing. Maybe her car had broken down. Maybe her son was sick. But something didn't feel right. By early afternoon, concern turned to fear. A coworker drove out to Rebekah's trailer park, hoping to check on her. Her silver car wasn't there. The front door was locked. No sound came from inside. The coworker glanced around. Everything looked normal, but Rebekah was gone. Then she saw it. Rebekah's car parked near a small local bar called the Barn Door, just a few hundred feet from her trailer. The bar was closed. The car sat silently in the lot. The coworker called the landlord, who came with a spare key. When they opened Rebekah's trailer, they found something chilling. The living room looked disturbed, like a brief struggle had taken place. A faint stain on the carpet. A chair turned over. But no Rebekah. They called police immediately. When officers arrived, they began piecing together the last time anyone had seen her. Rebekah had tucked Conway into bed the night before and planned to pick him up from his father that afternoon. But she never arrived. They quickly learned that Rebekah's mother's fiancé, Pastor John White, had watched Conway that morning. He had taken the boy to his father's house around 8:30 a.m. The pastor himself confirmed it. He said Rebekah must have left early for work, and everything seemed fine when he saw her last. At first, police had no reason to doubt him. John was a minister, a trusted man of faith, and seemed deeply concerned about Rebekah's disappearance. He even helped organize search efforts, offering prayers with volunteers. He comforted Sally, who was falling apart with worry. But detectives are trained to notice what others miss, and soon, little things about John didn't sit right. When officers visited his trailer for questioning, John greeted them calmly, almost rehearsed, like he'd been expecting them. They noticed scratches on his hands and a fresh cut on his nose. When they asked what happened, he smiled faintly and said a shelf in his trailer had fallen on him. The explanation was strange, but his tone was confident, as if daring them to challenge it. They asked him to recount his morning again. His version kept shifting. First, he said he'd gone to Rebekah's home early to see if she needed help with her son. Then he said she was in the bathroom, that he spoke to her through the door, but never saw her face. He claimed he'd fallen asleep on her couch for a bit, then woke up when Conway came out. He said he took the boy to his father and came back home. Something didn't add up. Why would a grown man, her mother's fiancé, fall asleep on her couch while she was getting ready for work? Why hadn't he seen her leave? The more he talked, the more uneasy the detectives felt. As the investigation deepened, police began looking at everyone in Rebekah's life. Her boyfriend, Aaron, was questioned. His alibi checked out immediately. He'd been out of town. Her ex, Conway's father, was cooperative and devastated. There was no sign of animosity. That left one person whose story didn't fit, Pastor John White. Detectives started quietly verifying his timeline. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him that morning until later than he claimed. Others mentioned he'd been acting strangely in the days before Halloween, withdrawn, quiet, distracted. And then there was the detail that kept circling back, the scratches on his hands. They weren't old. They looked fresh, defensive. John volunteered to take a polygraph test, a move that surprised investigators but didn't convince them. A guilty man might volunteer too if he believed he could control the outcome. So, they agreed to the test, but as he was waiting to be transported, the police made another move. They decided to search his home and truck. The moment they stepped inside his trailer, something felt wrong. It was neat, too neat. The kind of clean that comes after panic. On a small table near the door, officers found black trash bags, plastic zip ties, and a rubber mallet. In his bedroom drawer, they found several pieces of women's lingerie, all brand new, all tagged from Victoria's Secret. None of them belonged to Sally or anyone known. When they checked the bed of his pickup truck outside, they made an even darker discovery. A broken necklace, hair fibers, and what appeared to be dried blood. That's when everything shifted. The search for a missing woman was now an investigation into something far worse. Detectives returned to John. They told him what they'd found and asked if he could explain. For the first time, his confidence faltered. His breathing slowed. He said nothing. Then, quietly, he asked for a lawyer. It felt like the end of the conversation, but a few hours later, something unexpected happened. He changed his mind. John told investigators he was ready to talk, but only if they gave him 3 things. First, he said, he wanted a life sentence instead of the death penalty. Michigan didn't have the death penalty, but detectives played along. Second, he asked to be kept separate from other inmates. And third, he wanted to make a phone call. When officers asked who he wanted to call, his answer stunned them. He wanted to call Sally, Rebekah's mother, the woman who loved him, who was waiting in agony for news of her daughter. They allowed it. The phone rang. Sally answered, her voice trembling. John's tone was quiet, broken, but chillingly calm. "You are the love of my life," he said softly. "You probably won't see me or hear from me again. I'm sorry, I can't fix this." Sally froze, realizing she wasn't talking to the man she thought she knew. She was speaking to the monster who had taken her daughter away. The call ended. John put down the phone, looked at the detectives, and said he was ready to confess. But before he spoke, one of the investigators, a veteran with 20 years of experience, asked the question that had been haunting everyone. "John, why? Why Rebekah?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the floor, tapping his fingers against the table, like a man trying to steady himself before stepping off a cliff. As investigators dug deeper, they realized this horror didn't start with Rebekah Gay. John Douglas White had a history, a long, violent trail that stretched back decades. In 1980, when he was 22 years old and living in Battle Creek, Michigan, he invited his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Etherton, into his basement to show her a new racing track he had built for his cars. Moments after she stepped inside, he lunged at her with a hunting knife, stabbing her 15 times. Somehow, Teresa survived. Covered in blood, she managed to crawl out of the basement and reach the street before collapsing. When police arrested John, he claimed he didn't know why he'd done it. He pleaded guilty to assault with intent to murder and was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He served only 2. In court, the judge recommended mental health treatment, but it wasn't mandatory. There was no therapy, no evaluation, nothing to stop him from doing it again. 14 years later, in 1994, he did. At the time, John was married and working near Kalamazoo. He was having an affair with a 26-year-old coworker named Vicky Sue Wall. On July 11th, she vanished after being seen getting into his pickup truck in a grocery store parking lot. 6 weeks later, her decomposed body was found in a wooded area off East H Avenue. John told police she had overdosed on drugs and that he'd panicked, dumping her body because he didn't want to be blamed. Without clear forensic evidence, prosecutors couldn't prove murder. He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 8 to 15 years. He was released after 12. Inside prison, John claimed he had been reborn. He studied theology, earned a minister's certificate, and told anyone who would listen that God had changed him. He spoke softly, carried a Bible everywhere, and convinced parole boards that he was safe. By 2009, he was standing at the pulpit of a tiny church outside Mount Pleasant, preaching about redemption and second chances. To the congregation, he was proof that even the darkest souls could be saved. To Rebekah Gay and her mother, he seemed like a good man, gentle, helpful, sincere. No one knew that behind the sermons was a predator who had never stopped craving control. When detectives confronted him with his past, he didn't deny it. He said he had made peace with it, but peace was never what John White wanted. When he finally looked up, there was no emotion in his eyes, no grief, no fear, just a dull emptiness. The detectives waited, pen still, air heavy. Then John Douglas White began to speak. He told them that after drinking several beers on the night before Halloween, something dark had crept back into his mind. John watched videos of people having sexual contact with dead bodies. This was a recurring fantasy for him. He had been obsessed with this for about 2 weeks, and specifically had thoughts involving Rebekah at 2 a.m. His voice stayed steady as he described leaving his trailer around 2 a.m. in the morning, walking across the dim lot toward Rebekah Gay's home. The door was unlocked. She trusted him enough for that. When she stepped into the hallway, startled by the sound, he swung a rubber mallet until she fell. Then he tightened a plastic zip tie around her neck. The room went silent. One of the detectives clenched his jaw, staring down at the table. John continued, almost methodically. He said he cleaned the trailer as best he could, placed Rebekah's body inside a black garbage bag, and loaded it into the back of his pickup truck. He drove a mile away and left her beside a rural ditch. Then he returned home, moved her car near the bar to fake an abduction, and lay down on her couch to sleep. At 8:30 that morning, he woke to the sound of Conway's footsteps. The little boy calling for his mother. John fixed the child breakfast, dressed him, and calmly drove him to his father's house. When the detective asked how he could do that, how he could look into the eyes of Rebekah's son after what he'd done, John said nothing. He simply stared ahead, expressionless. By the time his confession ended, the sun had set. Outside the police station, reporters gathered, lights flickering in the cold air. Inside, officers prepared a search team. John White led them to the spot himself. A few hours later, in the early morning darkness of November 1st, 2012, officers found Rebekah's body exactly where he said it would be, inside a trash bag in a shallow ditch off Pickard Road. When word reached her mother, Sally Gay, she collapsed. The man she loved, the man she had planned to marry, had murdered her daughter. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. Mount Pleasant, a quiet town that had trusted its pastor completely, was now paralyzed by shock. The man who preached forgiveness on Sundays had become the face of unimaginable evil. After his arrest for Rebekah's murder, prosecutors moved quickly. The confession was ironclad. The evidence, blood, jewelry, the mallet, the zip ties, tied him beyond doubt. In March 2013, John Douglas White pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 56 to 85 years in prison. He would never walk free again. But prison wasn't the end of his story. 5 months later, on August 28, 2013, guards at the Ionia Correctional Facility began their rounds just after 4 in the morning. When they reached White's cell, they found him hanging from a bedsheet tied to the ceiling vent. The man who once claimed to have found God had taken his own life. He left no note, no explanation, just silence. John Douglas White's story ended inside a prison cell. But for many, his death brought no peace. Because if he had been properly punished for his first crime, so many lives, including Rebekah's, might have been saved. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented if the system had done its job? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. For Sally Gay, that silence was unbearable. She had already lost her daughter. Now, the man who killed her was gone too, taking every answer with him. In interviews later, she said she couldn't reconcile the two versions of John White, the kind, attentive fiancé and the monster who murdered her child. "I don't understand how both could exist," she said. "How can someone pray with you one night and destroy your world the next?" For the people of Mount Pleasant, the story became a wound that never fully healed. Church members who had defended John in the past were consumed by guilt. One elder said, "He fooled us all. We believed his redemption story because we wanted to believe anyone could change." But others saw the truth. John White hadn't changed at all. He had simply learned to wear the mask better. Rebekah's friends held a candlelight vigil outside the Goodwill store where she worked. They placed photos of her, surrounded by small pumpkins and handwritten notes. Co-workers remembered her as the one who could brighten any shift. Her boyfriend, Aaron, spoke quietly to reporters. She was kind to everyone. She trusted people too easily, he said. That's what made her special, and what made her vulnerable. As the candles flickered in the cold wind, Conway's grandparents held him close. He was too young to understand what had happened, too innocent to grasp the nightmare that had taken his mother away. Rebekah Gay's story isn't just about a murder. It's about trust, the kind we give to people we believe are good. It's about how predators exploit kindness, how they hide behind the language of redemption. She was a young mother who deserved a future. Instead, her name became a warning. If you visit Mount Pleasant today, the quiet feels heavier. The leaves still turn gold every fall. Kids still dress up for Halloween, and neighbors still wave to one another. But behind the small-town calm, the memory lingers. Because once, on a cold October morning, a man of God revealed what he truly was. And a town learned that monsters don't need masks. If this case moved you, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more true crime cases like this, don't forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.